All right. Testing, testing, testing. There's a great gulf fixed between us. I think it's because John is gone to Winterfest with our teens, and they have chaperones and all as well. And we're glad that they're gone, but we're glad that they're headed back now. And they took our bus on the first long trip ride that they had this time. It broke down, so it's a good trip. But they were at a place where they could get it fixed by a mechanic, and it delayed them a couple hours, but everything else has been just fine. And John sent a text this morning to me and the elders, and I don't know who else got it, but he wanted to thank the church for the bus, and it is something to be thanked for, something to be praiseworthy for. But we need to use the bus for lots of things, lots of adult rides and kid rides and teen rides, to do ministry or to get built up. And so we want to use the bus and make it something great. I told you a couple of weeks ago that I was going to lose some weight. Well, you didn't say anything. Well, I'm doing it for two reasons, basically. One is because my health, heart arrhythmia and blood pressure and other things like that. And the main reason was because I didn't want to buy bigger pants. And, I have a 34-inch waist, and I had a 34-inch waist when I came in 2001. I fill them up a lot better now than I did then. But, so I've done something. I've lost about 10 pounds. I still look like me. When I look in the mirror, it's still me. So you don't notice the 10 pounds. That's all right. But, I was thinking about this, and when Paige and I go out to eat, a lot of times we just order one meal. And the meal comes, and I eat everything I want, and then I give her the leftovers. No, I don't do that either. No, I also do that for two reasons. I don't want to get smacked in public. That's reason number one. But reason number two is because I love Paige. And because she is, everything to me. And so I give her a portion of the meal, half the meal, right off the bat. Why don't I eat everything I want until I'm full and then give her the leftovers? Why? Is that what you do? Is that why I'm hearing mumbling going on in the crowd? But I wonder if I were to share a meal with God, would it be like that? I wonder if I would automatically cut things in half and say, this is your half and this is my half. Now I realize God doesn't require food. So it's safe to say, it's safe to use him as an example. Because then we can say, well, sure I would. I mean, I would definitely give him half the food. But that's logical, right? After all, he's a creator of the world. He's a sovereign of the universe. He's a master of everything. He deserves half the food. But we don't share our food with God. That's not a problem. But what does God want from me? Dedication, loyalty, commitment, time, energy, money. we all have a tendency to say, well, God, let me just live my life. And then if I have something left over, I'm glad to give it to you. But that's not really biblical. It's not really biblical. If we have our time, who or what do we spend our time on? If we have our energy, or, maybe it's the first thing in the morning, or maybe it's in the afternoon, you get your energy and your work done. What part does God play? What part does he have? How does God fit into your life? That's a good question, isn't it? And we all got a place for God, right? Well, that's not really right either. God's not supposed to fit into our life. We're supposed to fit into his. Our lives fit into his. That's a completely different perspective. And really, when I think about my time, how much of my day do I give to God? We spend a lot of time urging your participation in things and your church attendance, for instance. So, it gets to be Wednesday night, Sunday night, Sunday morning for many. Or do I have time to make it to church, or am I spent by the time it gets here? Do I have the time and the energy to help Sister So-and-so get her? I used to think that was a person's name, incidentally. I don't want you to know that. There was a lady named Bedsole. That was the last name, Bedsole. I thought that's who the preacher was talking about whenever he would say, Sister So-and-so. Do we cut a grass? Or do we not have time for it, or not have energy for it? Or do we volunteer to sit at the tables and chairs for Wednesday night food and fellowship or other fellowship meals that we have? Or do we have the energy to teach Bible class? Or do we, it's so many things. So many things. But it's not our time. It's God's. It's not our energy. It's God's. It's not our money. It's God's. It's not our anything on this earth. We all belong to God, and so we do everything. So does everything we have belong to God. For in him we live and move and have our very being. This is the way Paul put it in Acts. The problem we have with this is the same problem the Israelites had in the book of Haggai. We're going to the book of Haggai. I've given you 3 or 4 minutes to be flipping in your pages till you find it, but you're called on now because we're going to be reading it. If you go to the halfway point in your Bible, not half divided up half, but the division between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then you back up about 8 pages or 9 pages, that's the book of Haggai. Haggai is, we call him a minor prophet. He has a major message, though, in this book. It's a great, great book. Haggai 1, chapter 1, verse 1. There's only 2 pages in most of your Bibles, chapter 1 and chapter 2. Haggai 1:1. In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Some of the names maybe, translated the way that I read them in the NIV, they are. Some of them may be different, depending on what translation you have. It's okay. Both kingdoms of the Jews, if you remember, had been carried off into captivity. They were, the northern kingdom was carried into Assyrian captivity. The southern kingdom, a little later on, was carried into Babylonian captivity. And so none of the Jews are living in Jerusalem at the time when Haggai writes, though, they have been released as slaves, and they've come back to the land of promise, and they're, over a period of time, they are now all in Jerusalem. They had, when they got to Jerusalem, the walls, were shambles, because the Babylonians had destroyed the city, Jerusalem. They destroyed the wall, they destroyed the temple, they destroyed everything in Jerusalem and took the people away over a period of time, took them away. Nehemiah came back to Jerusalem and examined the wall, and it was just a mess. It was a wreck. And you can recall his book in the Bible of them rebuilding the wall. So Jerusalem, had integrity again. And they also built a lot of places of business inside the wall. They reconstructed the city. And then they built the houses. And they all had a place to live inside the city walls of Jerusalem. And then they worked on the temple. But when Haggai is written, it's been about 14 or 15 years since they've done any work on the temple. So I can imagine God's waiting. Day one goes by. Week one goes by. Month one goes by. The first year goes by. Then the second year goes by. And the third year goes by. How long do we want to keep going? But God has rescued the people yet again. Brought them into the land of promise yet again. And they didn't have to fight anybody when they were there, although they had detractors. They didn't have to fight. They built the wall, built the city back, built their homes to live in. But they hadn't got around to building the temple yet. Verse 2 says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. So, God is listening to people's thoughts, and he's seeing their actions, converting them to thoughts. And they're saying, it's not time, or it's not, appropriate. I got things to do, is what they're saying, basically. Life got busy. We have a tendency to look at the Israelites, and they're jaded in some of their relationships. And we've seen them come and seen them go, and seen them come and seen them go. But, this is one of the occasions where they are on the way out again. But they're not really on the way out. You realize that they are not worshiping idols. That's what got them in trouble to begin with. They're not an idolatry worship at all. They're worshiping God. And they're probably praying, I'm assuming, to God. But life got busy. They're busy raising a family. They're busy with work, with their jobs, with keeping up with the house. Then they got soccer practice to go to and swimming lessons and schoolwork. And then there's date night. You got to keep up your relationship with your spouse. And then there's the homeowners association meeting and the PTA and the gym. You have to have some fitness about yourself. And then you need to go see the in-laws. And then there's the entertainment. We have to entertain ourselves. And, the more you work, the more life goes on, the more the work demands on you, the more life demands on you, the more your family demands on you. And before you know it, your calendar is full to the top. Well, what happened to the part we're supposed to give God? Most of us have a problem with this. And that's why I love the book of Haggai so much, and the Bible is so practical in a lot of its application and a lot of the message to the people. The people were people. We're people. Their problems are my problems. And I see their anxiety, and I get how full they are, but this brings it down to one chapter in the Bible where God calls this to attention. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Let's look at verses 3 and 4. Haggai 1, 3 and 4. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? He says he could have said a lot of things. I mean, you can imagine how he is hurt because the tabernacle and the temple was a place for God to reside. That's the importance of the temple. It's a place for God to reside. In the Holy of Holies is a place for God to reside. Well, they didn't build him a place. He said, is it right for you to be living in your paneled, or some of your translations say sealed houses, or some of you say luxurious houses? I think the NLT uses the word luxurious there. Whatever it is, you get the idea that they built a place to stay. That was probably pretty soon after they got there. But now they are sealed houses. And what that means really is that they've gone on the inside and they've done a lot of work in there. I mean, you got to have a presentable house, don't you? You got to have a nice house. I mean, that's just common for everybody. You got to have a nice house. Well, we got to have a nice house. There's nothing wrong with nice houses. But what does it cost you in time and energy and money? So God calls that to their attention. So he says this house is not inhabitable. It's a ruin. Now, they had started working on it, and they built the foundation. And they had some of the walls started. But then they left off work for 15 years. You know, after such amount of time, they're degrading the work that they did. There's a place in Montgomery where a large church was being built. I mean, it was massive. And it was out close to Vaughan Road, and it was going to be something spectacular. They had the church's name. But then it sat, and it sat, and it sat. And they had the foundation built, and they had some of the walls started. They had the framework for everything. It was all metal construction. They had the framework up. They didn't have a roof on it. Framework never got any walls put on it. And it sat for a year. And it sat for 2 years. And 3 years. And then Page's uncle, Bo, got a call, or he put in a bid because they were selling the church. And so he bought that church building to took it down, and they built Hunter Station Church out of it. Hunter Hills is what they call it now. They built that church out of the one that he took down. And he built a barn, and there's tons of things that were built from that massive configuration. Well, what happened to the church? That's such a blight on everything, a blight on the church's name, or a blight on Christianity in general. They never got it constructed. That's what this building would have represented to the people that were there. They would drive by or walk by every so often, and the kids say, "What is that place over there?" And they would have to tell them, "Well, that's the Lord's house." That doesn't make very good sense, does it? That's not a place of pride at all. But it sat there in the middle of town for year after year after year. Well, before we go too far in explaining the place for God to reside, where is the temple today? If somebody were to pull into Lakeland and ask you, "I want to go where God resides, I want to go to the temple," where would you tell them? It's in here. That we are all the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that we are the temple of God. Well, then it comes clearer to me. I wonder how long God is waiting for me to build the temple for him that's appropriate to use. Because he can't reside in anybody or everybody. But he resides in the hearts of people who depend on him and who pray to him and who love him and who give to him their time and money and energy and all these things. Verses 5 and 6. He says, now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. God says, give careful thought to your ways. And when I was thinking about this, you know, that applies to me. It applies to many of you too. But how fulfilled are we in life? Or saying it the other way around, how frustrated are we with life? Does the money run out before the month runs out at your house? Does your energy run out and you still got a list that long of things that you need to do? Does your time run out? How many times have we said, boy, I wish we had another day this week? But we spend everything we have. It's like eating the plate of food and then giving leftovers to Paige. We spend everything that we have, time, energy, money, and all the rest, on ourselves. I spent a fortune on a trampoline, a stationary bike, and a rowing machine, complete with gadgets to read my pulse and gadgets to prove my progress results, and others to show the miles I've charted. But they left off the gadget to get me started. I'm afraid that's the way a lot of our lives are, because we spend and spend and spend, and we don't have enough, and we're not happy with what we have. We feel like if we get to the next level, then finally I will be happy. We get to the next level only to do what? Fill it up again and want more. And it's a futile existence. Verse 9. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth is crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. He's saying, give careful thought to your ways. Sit back and evaluate how life has been. And you will see it's not working out too well. My relationships don't work out too well. My house expense is everything I can do to pay the house expense. He says there's a reason for that. I caused the crops not to produce. And you're working on crops all the time. I caused the cattle to get sick. I caused the cattle to not have as many offspring, or wild animals are eating some or whatever. He said, I'm responsible for the fruit industry. I can either make it grow a lot, or I can make it not grow. He said, I've not let it grow. The little bit you have is a great blessing, but it's not nearly the blessing that God wants to give you. Well, the same thing is true for us. I'm out of oil for my lamps. I lost several cows that died during the last year. I was almost finished making that lampstand that took forever to build, and then I broke it before I finished. I don't know if I've got the energy to do it again. Why don't things ever get straightened out in my life? How many times have I heard people say things like that? That's us too. Now, what is framed around this is verse 5. It says, now this is what the Lord Almighty says, give careful thoughts to your ways. And it's also what it says in verse 7. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. They're duplicates. And they're surrounding verse 6. If we really evaluated and really spent time going back over what we have done and how it's produced for us, we would probably have the same result they have. So he gives us a solution. He says, go up in the mountains and chop the wood and start building. Now, let's read in verse 12. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him. And the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I'm with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty their God on the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of King Darius. They got the message. And they evaluated their lives and said, you're right. It's not producing everything that I thought it would produce. It's not producing anything like what it could produce. And when they evaluated the message, they decided, we have not built the house for God. That's why. So they did 3 things that's encapsulated in those verses. In verse 12, they feared God. They feared the Lord. What does that mean? It's an awesome respect. More than cowering in fear, that kind of fear. It's more of the respect due the sovereign God of the universe, the creator of everything. He has everything. Why did he say in Psalms, I have the cows on 1,000 hills? He said that to show us that he owns those cows, or he owns the creation. He owns everything. He built you and built me. He gave us this church building. He gave us cars to drive. He gave us the houses that we have. And for us not to share, that doesn't make good sense. We wouldn't let our children be that way. My girls love and respect me and Paige. But there's times when they haven't loved us or respected us. It doesn't change how I feel about them. It changes how I react to them. And if we want our kids to love and appreciate us, then we make demands on the kids to be loving and to show appreciation appropriately. And if they don't, that doesn't change one iota about how I feel about my girls. But it may change the gifts that I get them. It may change some things that I want to do for them, but I'm not going to do it because they're not respectful. You understand what I'm saying? Why would my kids be different from us and God? God says, I've given you everything I can think of that you wanted and you had to have. But where am I in the mix? And so God has withheld his blessing to the people because they didn't fear God. I think it's interesting that they waited till verse 12 to say that they feared God. Because the Israelites had been, in the goings and comings, God had shown himself to them repeatedly, over and over. And, repeatedly, even in this process. He got them back home to the promised land. They didn't have to fight. They didn't have anything to depend on themselves for. But they didn't fear him until it was brought to their attention. And then second, the people obeyed in verse 12. They obeyed. So, akin to fear, obedience follows next. Obedience follows next. What were they told to do? You need to go up in a mountain and cut some wood. And you need to make some lumber. And you need to get started on, your work. This is important to me. It was more important to him than them building their paneled houses. It was more important than their fields and their crops and all that stuff. And third, they began to work in verse 14. They started to work. And you noticed in verse 14 also, they got enthused about it. And they were energetic about it. And, their leaders were energetic and enthused about the work. And they called everybody in and everybody got up. And so they completed the temple and in record time. And it was a beautiful temple. And they continued to work in their houses, and they continued to have their jobs. They continued to have their families. But somehow there was enough time for both. And somehow there was enough money for both. And somehow it all just worked out. Did it just work out? Or did God not bless them? The title of the sermon today is I Can't Get No Satisfaction. I started to do that at the beginning like usual, but I thought it would be more appropriate at the end. I can't get no satisfaction. In my life, if I'm not satisfied with the work that's going on in my house or the work that's going on in my family or my relationships, I'm not satisfied with my car, I'm not satisfied with the economy, I'm not satisfied with politics, I'm not satisfied, I just don't care, I'm just not satisfied. There's a way to be satisfied. It's by putting God first. We say that. Everybody knows that. He needs to be first in everything. He needs to be first in my income. He needs to be first in my work, my job. He needs to be first in my family. He needs to be first with my kids. Then I believe, like we will also find satisfaction. Solomon said in Proverbs, satisfaction with a man's work is all that we're wanting. And he could say that because he recognized who God was and how great God is. Are you satisfied with your life? Maybe you need to change some things. Maybe you need to shake some things up. Maybe you need to come back to the Lord if you moved away. Please come as we stand and sing.